Good evening and welcome to a special Swing State. Tonight we're using the magic of fiber optics to bring you the kind of guest you rarely see on a program like this. Fox News anchor Bret Baier joins us from his studio in Washington, D.C. And then many of you, of course, will know him as the host of Special Report, weeknights at 6 on the Fox News channel, a gig that he's had for the last 15 years or so. And, you know, at the risk of besmirching your great reputation, Bret, you and I spent a lot of time together, either at political events when you were working here in North Carolina, and man, we hung out at hurricanes.
That's right. Yeah, good to see you, Bob. Yeah, WRAL days, that's now 27 and a half years ago. So I've been at Fox for 27 years, but yeah, we've seen each other a bunch over the years. And now you've got this swing state, which is a perfect name for North Carolina as we head into the election.
Absolutely. The thing on the top of people's minds, of course, who watch the show is presidential politics. So just generally, what do you make of the race as it stands right now?
Well, completely turned upside down. I mean, who knew 3.5 weeks ago that debate at CNN, that one debate would change the world. When President Biden walked out there and uttered the first few answers and got, stumbled, that changed everything. And because it was so early, now this process has essentially pushed him out. And now the coronation of Kamala Harris happened very quickly. Within 72 hours, the delegates lined up, and now we're told she has enough delegates, the majority, and for the first day of the Democratic Convention in Chicago to get the nomination. So no one's standing up against her. I think the new Reuters Ipsos poll has her up 2 on former President Trump. Quinnipiac has Trump up 2 on her. I think it's a different race today than it was just days ago.
Before we get into the race, I have to ask, because you might have inside knowledge. My sense is, from the outside, President Biden was not happy at all about this, and that what finally turned the tide was donors saying, look, we're cutting off the spigots, and you'll not only lose the White House, you'll lose the Senate, you'll lose the House, and maybe more. Is your sense that's what really was the factor that led to this?
It was the donors turning off the spigot, but more importantly, it was Nancy Pelosi who made a personal appeal, we're told, with polls, internal polls from swing states saying things were turning upside down. She was showing them to Joe Biden and his team. He was pushing back, saying he was going to stay in. And then reportedly, she threatened to go public with those internal polls, and it was going to get ugly. So the knives were out. President Obama was one of the people who was pushing to have Joe Biden make that decision that he eventually made. It was not willing. He was being pushed and pulled to that decision. He finally made it. Now, of course, the party is saying he's patriotic and selfless, right. But it took him a long time to get there.
Let's look forward then, because I want to know how big a deal this election is. People we see on both sides of the political spectrum claiming it could end democracy if it goes one way or the other. You and I have covered enough of these things to know that's highly unlikely, but how might things change depending on which party wins in November?
It is a big change. I mean, no matter where you are ideologically, you can make one choice or the other, and the country goes different ways. And it's on a number of fronts. You go down the issues, there are 2 different looks at how to handle things, both internally, domestically, and on foreign policy. So it is a big election. Everybody always says this is the biggest election of our lifetime. This is a stark change between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Now, the threat to democracy, it is being used by Democrats a lot. They point back to January 6th, which was really a dark day, and how former President Trump handled that is something that will come under scrutiny over this election, surely in ads and Democratic attacks. But how Democrats chose Kamala Harris is not exactly democracy at its finest either. There's not one single voter who will have voted for the Democratic nominee by the time she takes over that nomination in Chicago.
Right, that's a big thing, I think, in a way, because it is not an insurrection for people who feel like January 6th was an insurrection. That was constitutional, it was legal. But when you say you believe in democracy, and then the first time democracy is inconvenient, you say, well, we really don't care about how people voted, then that cuts out your validity.
Well, it takes out some of the steam out of the argument, at least. I'm not sure it's the Democrats' best play anyway, but because every time they've gone down this road, it has not worked when we've seen in the polls. I do think that you're going to see this pitch by Kamala Harris, the vice president, that I was a prosecutor. I was a former prosecutor in California, and it's the prosecutor versus the felon, former President Trump. So there'll be a pushback on the Trump side on that. But that's how the race is framing up.
We hear a lot of calls for third parties, and I don't, this is the time for one. Is our system really not set up to have a third party?
Ross Perot got 19% back in that 1992 race. He's the strongest third party. We do see Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Getting 10, 12% in some states. That's significant. If he holds that and is on the ballot, that could make the difference. If you think back to other candidates like Green Party Jill Stein or Ralph Nader, just 1-2% could change a race that's really close. So no, third parties have not risen to the top. But they can factor in significantly, especially in those swing states.
All right, got about a minute left in the segment, but I want to bring up what I call the shift of the Big Seven, and that is how, at the end of World War II, 7 states in the Northeast and the Midwest, New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Illinois, Michigan, gave you 186 out of the 266 electoral votes you needed at that time, 70%. And at the same time, the southern 6, Texas, Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, Alabama, only gave you 91, about a third of what you needed. Now that is flipped. Those northern states give you 123 of 270, 45%. The southeast give you 134 of the 270, nearly half of what you need. How has that changed politics now that the locus of getting elected has shifted from the north and Midwest to the southeast? And California, of course.
Well, it has changed, where they focus. It changes issues. It means that traditionally the parties come back to the center, although we haven't seen that in recent elections as much. It's been about firing up the base. But Republicans are well positioned on the Electoral College map. It makes the path a little bit more difficult for Democrats at times in the electoral map as opposed to the popular vote. And it does change, perhaps, who Kamala Harris chooses for her vice president. I wouldn't be surprised to see your governor on the short list.
All right, as you heard, Brett knows this state well from his time living here. We'll talk about the significance of North Carolina in this year's election next. Tonight, we're honored to have the entire half hour to talk to Fox News' host of the special report, Bret Baier. Bret, you spent a lot of time in this state when you were working at WRAL in Raleigh. And how do you see North Carolina politically? We're now tied for 8th most electoral votes, just 1 fewer than Ohio, 3 fewer than Pennsylvania. Is it enough of a battleground that you hear the campaigns talking about this state regularly?
It is, and it has been. I mean, you look at Democrats holding the convention there in Charlotte. You look at Republicans focusing on North Carolina. It's interesting, you have 2 North Carolina Republican senators to the U.S. Senate, and yet you have a Democratic governor and Democratic state house in local elections. It favors Democrats. I think North Carolina can be purple. And it is something that Democrats really aspire to go after, which is why I mentioned in the last segment that I think Governor Cooper is probably on the short list for Vice President Harris as she looks around the country at possible politicians to call up and ask to be VP.
Did you get any sense in your time here on why we had that odd thing of we elect Republicans to federal offices, Democrats to state offices? I'm not quite sure I've figured it out, but I've been looking at that. What do you think?
Yeah. I don't know why. I think Democrats, play locally, and I do think that the focus on the national issues kind of the parties line up a little bit better nationally for Republicans when it comes to North Carolina, but it's been tight. I mean, all these national races have been tight. The Senate races have been fairly tight. I mean, single digits. So it's purplish. When it comes to national races, it's more purplish red.
You know, no matter how this presidential election goes, my sense is that at least one of our major adversaries, China, Russia, or Iran, maybe even some coordinated combination of the three of them, are going to make a major move between the election and next year to take advantage of what they see as division in this country. What's your reporting say about that?
Well, 100%, and this is a really vulnerable time with President Biden stepping out of the nomination, yet staying in the presidency. He is speaking to the nation about that. Republicans are coming after him, saying if you drop from the nomination, likely because of health, his brother and sister said health was a key factor in the decision, then is he healthy enough to go the 5 months in a tumultuous time around the world? I do think transition is a time when bad actors really try to take advantage of our country. And they have a lot more levers now, especially with AI and deep fakes and social media. Sometimes some of these accounts that you see stirring the pot are not only not real people, but they're from out of the country. Yeah. So people need to think about what they're reading and seeing on social media.
You know, you've interviewed many of the major players on the world stage: Ukraine's President Zelensky, Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu, Saudi Arabia's Mohammed bin Salman, our former President Trump, although interestingly, you never got a one-on-one with President Biden, and it doesn't appear like that's going to happen before he leaves office. But I got to ask, who would you want to talk to that you...
We tried.
Yeah, many times. Hopefully you'll get one with their nominee if it coming up soon. Who, though, have you not talked to yet who you'd love to get?
We're working on a number of fronts on world leaders, and one of them is Xi Jinping, the Chinese president. And if that comes to pass, I think it would be a really consequential interview. I do think that it's worth investing the time in establishing those relationships and also bringing foreign policy stories to the forefront for people here. A lot of times we focus about what's happening within our borders, but what's happening around the world affects us directly. That MBS interview and the Netanyahu interview happened a week and a half before October 7th. And they were both talking about how they were very close on the finish line to normalization that would change the face of the Middle East. Obviously, Iran and Hamas saw that, and October 7th happened soon thereafter. I think they're trying to rekindle that relationship, and we'll see if there's another interview to come soon.
When you get those big interviews, how do you determine what to ask, not just what's important, but what's relevant and what's fair? What's that process like?
Well, I mean, you really have to study. You have to really get into the weeds of what's important. You know, for the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, obviously the Khashoggi murder, the 9/11 families, controversial issues that I was not going to avoid. And I told the Saudis that at the beginning. And they were fine with it. They thought tough but fair is what they were looking for. And that's really what I try to do in every interview, as you do, Bob.
Yeah, our colleague Brit Hume, someone we both have a lot of respect for, once told me that it's not a candidate that decides an election, it's events and circumstances, situations. Is that your experience?
I do think that. I think candidates have some play, but it is the environment. And look at what has just happened over the past 3.5 weeks. I mean, none of us thought we would be here with a different nominee for the Democratic Party as that debate started on June 27th. None of us. And then you fast forward to just a little bit more than a week ago, an assassination attempt on a political opponent, assassination attempt on the former president of the United States. His survival and then getting up at the GOP nomination with that bandage and accepting the nomination. That's pretty amazing if you think about what we've been through as a country politically just in a short time frame. So those events have shaped this race. Candidates do make somewhat of a difference. They have to be good.
Right. I'm wondering if you ever hear from any of these big names who disappear from the scene. Let's think in George W. Bush, President Clinton, President Obama. Do they ever contact you about anything?
Not directly contact, but I've seen them at different events. I've talked to them. I was at an event in Dallas, and I made my way to President Bush's office. Obviously, I covered that White House, so I had a little talk with him. And I saw President Clinton at at a memorial service recently, and I pulled aside and talked to him. And I saw President Obama at a golf outing, and I talked to him. So I have run into them, and I have had conversations. You know, they're all still in the game politically. They're very, savvy about what's going on, and maybe President Obama more vocal than the other two.
And they're willing to share some of that in your conversations?
Yeah, not a ton of info behind the scenes, but they really love the political game and are more asking me questions about where things stand on certain issues than not.
Nice to be the source for presidents. Well, there's more to Brett than just politics. We'll talk about his books, his family, and maybe even some golf next. Just a few minutes left with Bret Baier of Fox News. And Brett, we have to, something I just got to ask you. I want to know what's one of those stories that you might tell over a couple of pints at Off the Record. And for our viewers, Off the Record is a famous bar in the Hay Adams Hotel across the street from Washington, D.C., a great journalistic hangout. What's some story that you might tell there that our viewers would love?
Well, I started in small market TV, and I bounced around the country, and I actually started at CNN working for Bernard Shaw as a writer, kind of intern position. But then my first on-air job was in Beaufort, South Carolina, WJWJ TV, and I was the Hilton Head bureau chief. But really, it was just me as a one-man band, and did my stories, but didn't make a lot of money, and so I delivered food and I bartended on the side. And so I would turn in my story midday, and then I would go to work and I would start delivering food. So I'd get to somebody's house and they'd say, "Wait a second, aren't you the reporter on Channel 6? And I'd say, "Yes, did you order the calzone?" And that's how life went, and bartending as well. So went from there to Rockford, Illinois, then to Raleigh for WRAL, and then started with Fox when Fox started 27 years ago.
Yeah, glamorous life of a TV guy delivering food in his extra time. You've written 6 books, and I think I sent you a picture when I came across one when my family and I were staying at someone's home on a trip. 3 Days in January. It's the book about President Eisenhower, brilliant book. I want to know, though, how do you go about writing those things? Because that's an awful lot of work.
It is a lot of work, and the first one took about 3 years. That was the 3 Days in January. My very first book was called Special Heart, about my son Paul's journey with congenital heart disease, and that was more of a cathartic thing. But I got the bug writing and started that process with 3 Days in January. So that took about 3 years because it was trying to figure out how to do it. I got a co-author and a researcher. We came up with this blueprint of looking through a soda straw in history and then bouncing back and showing how that leader gets there. So I did Eisenhower, Reagan, FDR, Churchill, and Stalin. Then I went backwards to Ulysses S. Grant. The last one was about George Washington and the Constitutional Convention. And then I'm working on right now a book about Teddy Roosevelt. So that'll be out next year. And I love the process, Bob. I'm really addicted to it.
That's awesome. We've spoken a lot tonight about world figures that you've dealt with regularly. But I know, knowing you as I do, though, I'm confident the story that does mean the most to you is the one you just mentioned. Anything having to do with family, and particularly in the public eye, has been your son Paul and his battle with a congenital heart issue since birth, I think, right? Quite a kid and quite a journey. What can you tell us about that?
Well, he was born with 5 congenital heart defects. Basically, his heart was pumping the wrong way. We didn't know, and he had to have emergency surgery to rework a walnut-sized heart in the first few days. So that started our journey at Children's National here in D.C. Because the fix didn't grow with him, he had to have multiple surgeries. So he had one at 10 months, one at 6 years, one at 13 years. He just had his 5th open heart surgery. It was kind of emergent. We didn't know it was going to happen just 10 weeks ago. And he's doing great. He's 17 years old. He's 6'3". He's on the varsity golf team, and he's back at it after his last surgery. So we're very blessed, and and Children's National has, obviously saved his life multiple times.
Like my son, the soccer player, I was his first coach. I'm imagining you were Paul's first coach as golf. People don't know this, but you played golf at DePauw in Greencastle, Indiana. Was that a scholarship position?
It was. I played on the varsity team all
Okay.
4 years, and I was the captain the senior year. And we went to the NCAAs. It was a great team, DePauw in Indiana, AUW,
Right.
And not the AUL in Chicago. But it was a great experience. I'm a long way away from that golfer at the scratch. I'm about a 3 handicap, but I'm a walking wallet. I just hand out money to my buddies.
Oh, we need to play
working
then.
too much.
We need to play, although I'm no good. I'll get my son to play for me. But I mean, because you grew up mostly in Atlanta, right? You went to Marist High School, which is the arch rival of my 2 nephews who went to St. Pius, which is down there.
Yes.
Yeah.
The Fishbowl.
Did you look at other schools, or how'd you end up at DePauw?
My dad went there, and it was not my first choice, but the golf team it happened. It all came together. I was looking at Northwestern to maybe try to play golf there. I wanted to play golf in school, and it turned out that was a great place to be. It also had a really new media center, and I was the first anchor on the TV station there, which talked to about 6 viewers in rural Indiana. I think I could name them, Sally, Bob, Frank. And it was horrible television, but it was a lot of fun.
So who is your favorite golf partner that we might know the name of?
So I played at the AT&T in Pebble Beach a number of years, and I played with Russell Henley from Georgia, and he played at the University of Georgia. Great professional, just finished really high at the British Open, and he always plays well in the majors. We made the cut at the AT&T, so I really liked playing with him. And I played with a whole bunch of pros, but my best thing every year is to go to the American Century Celebrity Tournament out in Lake Tahoe. And that's where you're the pro, and I play against all these celebrities who are good golfers. And I finished 7th. That was my best finish. So I'll strive for the top 5.
Pretty darn good. I got to find a way to either get you here to be my member guest, or maybe find my way to DC or Florida to play a little bit with you.
You got it. Open invite.
All right, but I'm going to need lessons. I've got what do they say in Boston? A wicked slice. I've got the wicked slice, so I can do that all day. So if it's a dog-legged right, we're set. So anyway, Brett, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And remember, we're not just a TV show, we're a podcast. You can get it wherever you get your podcast. Just search for Swing State. We'll see you next time.